It happens just before midnight in the Western Pacific. Satellites pick up the flash of launches deep inside North Korea. Not tests this time, not bluffs, but a real barrage. A half-dozen ballistic missiles arc into the sky, their trajectories aimed south and east toward American installations in Japan. The alarm spreads in seconds. Sirens wail at Misawa, Yokosuka, Okinawa. On the giant screens at Indo-Pacific Command, the lines are already clear. North Korea is striking at a U.S. base. Aboard the USS Shiloh, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser cutting silently through the dark seas off Japan, the mood shifts from steady routine to lethal precision. Crewmen snap into practiced roles. The Aegis combat system, long drilled for this nightmare scenario, is alive with contacts. Green icons multiply on the radar scopes. The watch officer doesn't hesitate. Vampires inbound. Confirm hostile. Defensive fire authorized. The captain's voice booms across the ship. Weapons free. Hatches slide open along the cruiser's deck. Inside the vertical launch cells, SM-3 interceptors wait like coiled fists. Orders flow fast but calm. Target packages uploaded. Firing solutions locked. The computer-controlled countdown is merciless. Birds away, birds away. The missiles roar from the ship with blinding fire, climbing in staggered salvos. Their boosters ignite the night, streaking upward to meet the oncoming threats. Each one is a spear hurled into the dark, chasing the ballistic arcs as they cross the upper atmosphere. Crew members watch their monitors, eyes locked on glowing symbols racing toward each other at impossible speeds. At 12:04 a.m., the first intercept occurs. A white blossom lights up the edge of space, faint but unmistakable. One North Korean missile obliterated before it can descend. Cheers ripple through the combat center, but no one relaxes. 5 more targets remain. On shore, families huddle in shelters as the sound of sirens mixes with distant thunder. News outlets scramble to confirm what everyone already suspects. The nightmare scenario has arrived. For the first time in decades, an American base in Japan is under direct missile threat. Back aboard the Shiloh, the fight intensifies. Interceptors scream from their launch tubes in succession, each one hunting a warhead. The Aegis system updates by the second, assigning targets, correcting trajectories, guiding the missiles closer to their prey. One by one, blossoms of fire mark the sky. The second kill confirmed, then the third. But not all are clean. One incoming missile slips through the defensive net, its re-entry vehicle breaking apart into decoys as it plunges toward Japan. The command room tightens. A final interceptor is fired, streaking through the atmosphere. Seconds tick like hours. Then, on the screen, the hostile symbol vanishes. Kill confirmed. By 12:11 a.m., silence settles. The barrage is gone, intercepted high above the Pacific. On the ground, impact sirens cease. For the crews aboard the Shiloh, adrenaline fades into exhausted relief. They know what just happened. A naval ship in international waters has stopped a direct strike on U.S. territory overseas. In Washington, the president is briefed within minutes. The headline is clear. North Korea has crossed a line. For the Pentagon, it is validation. Years of investment in sea-based missile defense proving itself in the most real of tests. But it is also escalation. Because Pyongyang will not treat this as a failed strike. It will treat it as an act of war. The missiles are down, the base is safe. But in the hours to come, the Pacific will not be calm. 01:00 local time. The sea is calm again, but only on the surface. In command centers from Tokyo to Washington, the air is electric with fury. North Korea has fired directly at a U.S. base in Japan. The intercepts worked, but the fact of the launch changes everything. For Japan, it is a violation of sovereignty and a trauma relived. Missiles once again streaking toward its soil. For the United States, it is an act of war narrowly avoided. In Tokyo, prime ministerial staff draft statements through the night. Cabinet ministers speak in hushed, clipped tones. Japan cannot appear weak. They prepare to invoke collective self-defense, a phrase that has long hovered on the edge of law and politics. Crowds gather outside the Diet with phones raised, watching live coverage of glowing contrails burned into the night sky. The words "First Strike" trend across social feeds. In Washington, the president is briefed with grim precision. The Secretary of Defense lays out options: a joint U.S.-Japanese strike on the launch sites, heavy cyber operations designed to blind Pyongyang's command networks, or a surge of air and naval patrols meant to demonstrate dominance without firing back. Each option carries risk. Each risks pushing North Korea from provocation into all-out war. Donald Trump, never one for careful understatement, takes to the cameras. His jaw is tight, his tone cutting. North Korea tried to hit our people, our base, our allies. They failed. Thanks to the U.S. Navy, they will always fail. But let me be clear. If they try again, there will be consequences they cannot imagine. The words echo around the globe, amplified by allies and adversaries alike. On the deck of the USS Shiloh, sailors crowd the mess to watch their commander-in-chief speak. The mood is pride laced with dread. They know they've made history. Intercepting an entire volley of ballistic missiles is no small feat. But they also know the burden of proof now sits squarely on their shoulders. Every move North Korea makes, every future launch, will test them first. In Pyongyang, the regime responds with its usual theater of fury. State television declares that the launches were a warning strike, proof that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea can rain fire on American occupiers and their puppets. The fact that the missiles were intercepted does not make the message weaker. If anything, it makes the rhetoric sharper. The announcer promises retaliation if U.S. or Japanese forces strike inside North Korean territory. Crowds in Pyongyang are shown cheering, waving red flags, shouting rehearsed defiance into cameras. But behind the scenes, North Korea's generals are shaken. Their barrage was meant to intimidate, not to be swatted from the sky. The failure underlines a brutal truth. The U.S. Navy's shield works. It makes their vaunted arsenal less absolute, less terrifying. That reality gnaws at the regime's credibility. And regimes that trade in fear cannot afford to appear weak. By dawn in Tokyo, Allied forces are on high alert. Japanese Aegis destroyers join American cruisers in patrol formation, their radars fanning across the horizon. U.S. Air Force squadrons from Okinawa deploy to backup strips, dispersing to avoid being targeted in a single strike. Civil defense drills roll out across Japanese cities, air raid sirens cutting through the morning calm. And still, the question looms: does the U.S. strike back? Every minute of hesitation is dissected in capitals worldwide. In Seoul, officials fear that retaliation could spark artillery fire across the border, dragging South Korea into a nightmare of urban bombardment. In Beijing, diplomats urge restraint, but quietly calculate the leverage such chaos gives China. In Moscow, state media feigns outrage at U.S. aggression, even as the Kremlin's generals study the intercept footage with wary respect. The Pacific, long a chessboard of patrols and deterrence, has shifted overnight. No longer theory, no longer exercise, but live fire and interception. North Korea has tested the shield. The shield has held. The next move could decide whether it remains a contained flashpoint or the opening salvo of a regional war. 0330 local time. The Pacific does not sleep. In Washington and Tokyo, the decision is made. The response cannot be silence. If North Korea fired live missiles at an American base, then there must be a cost. But it is a cost to be delivered with care, enough to show power, not enough to ignite the peninsula in flames. The first weapon chosen is invisible. At 0345, U.S. Cyber Command initiates a strike designed to scramble North Korean command networks. Switchboards go dark, radar screens freeze mid-sweep. Communications between launch batteries choke with static. To the outside world, nothing appears to happen, but inside North Korean bunkers, chaos brews. Officers slam phones, technicians pound consoles. For a regime built on the illusion of omnipotence, sudden blindness is terror. While cyberspace churns, the Navy takes the stage. Carrier strike groups fan across the Pacific with deliberate visibility. The USS Ronald Reagan surges from Yokosuka, its deck alive with fighters armed and waiting. Destroyers and cruisers move in phalanx formation, their radars painting the sea and sky. The message is unmistakable. The shield is wide, and it is ready. At 0410, Japanese forces join. Aegis destroyers from the Maritime Self-Defense Force sail alongside American ships, their decks bristling with interceptors. It is a rare sight. Japan's Navy moving in combat formation with the United States, not in exercise but in earnest. Television networks broadcast the footage within minutes, the glow of ships under floodlights reflected on calm water. For the Japanese public, it is reassurance and dread in equal measure. North Korea reacts with fury. State radio bursts into life, declaring that imperialist forces are preparing invasion. In Pyongyang, the military stages its own performance. Mobile missile launchers rumbling through city streets, soldiers saluting before cameras, crowds rehearsed to cheer defiance. But analysts watching satellite feeds know the truth. Many of those launchers are decoys, cardboard shells built for propaganda. The real weapons are hidden, and they are not moving. By 0430, the confrontation shifts again. A North Korean coastal battery fires a short-range missile into the sea, deliberately aimed to splash down far from Allied ships. It is a gesture, a warning. We are not finished. On the USS Shiloh, radar screens light up with the contact, and for one tense moment, weapons officers hover over their consoles. The missile arcs harmlessly into the waves, but the message lands all the same. Inside Seoul, South Korean officials panic. They plead with Washington not to push too far. Every provocation risks unleashing artillery hellfire on the millions who live within range of the DMZ. Families line up for supplies. Subway tunnels are surveyed as improvised shelters. For the South, escalation means apocalypse at their doorstep. In Beijing, the calculus sharpens. Chinese frigates move quietly into the East China Sea, not to fight, but to observe, to remind Washington that another great power is watching every move. Chinese state media frames the crisis as proof that American aggression destabilizes Asia, even as its diplomats whisper to Pyongyang to stop short of triggering war. By dawn, the Pacific balance looks very different. American and Japanese ships hold the line, their interceptors armed, their radars sweeping. North Korea fumes but hesitates, its network still faltering under cyber assault. The world sees a fragile stalemate, but those inside command centers know the truth. One mistake, one miscalculation, could unleash a spiral no one can control. The missiles have been stopped, the shields are up, but the game has changed. 0520 local time. The Pacific dawn paints the horizon in pale light, but there is no calm. The American and Japanese flotillas cruise in tense formation, radars sweeping, engines thrumming. Every sailor feels it in their bones. North Korea has not finished. The first shot comes suddenly. A coastal launcher hidden in a rocky cove spits fire. Radar operators aboard the USS Barry, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, see the launch instantly, a short-range missile streaking low over the water, fast and erratic. The ship's alarms howl. Within seconds, the crew reacts. Missile inbound. Bearing 085, range 40 kilometers. On the bridge, the captain barks orders. The Barry's Aegis system locks on, vertical launch cells groan open, and an SM-2 interceptor screams skyward. Crew members brace as the ship vibrates under the release. Moments later, a bloom of flame marks the intercept. The threat is gone, but the message is unmistakable. For the first time in decades, an American warship has been fired on in the Pacific. The news races through command networks. In Tokyo, ministers sit in stunned silence before shouting for clarity. In Washington, the president leans over the conference table, red-faced, demanding, "Hit them back. Show them what happens when you fire on our ships." Navy commanders, grim but composed, lay out options. Strike the battery that fired, disable radar installations along the coast, or unleash a broader campaign of suppression. At 0545, the decision comes, a limited but lethal response. From the deck of the USS Shiloh, Tomahawk cruise missiles rise into the morning air, their contrails cutting white scars across the sky. Their targets are precise, the launch cove, ammunition depots, and radar stations feeding the battery. Minutes later, explosions ripple along the North Korean coastline. Fireballs rise, debris rains down. For American crews watching through satellite feeds, it is payback. For Pyongyang, it is confirmation. The confrontation has crossed into open combat. The regime responds with fury. Propaganda channels declare that the American Imperial Fleet has attacked sovereign soil. Crowds in Pyongyang are herded into plazas to chant defiance. State television warns that more strikes will follow, that invaders will drown in fire. Across the Pacific, fear spreads faster than missiles. In Seoul, subway stations swell with civilians seeking shelter. In Tokyo, the Prime Minister calls for emergency evacuation drills. Sirens echo in coastal towns, and people look to the sky, wondering if the next contrail means defense or death. China reacts sharply. Beijing announces that U.S. recklessness threatens regional stability, deploying more ships to shadow the American fleet. Their warships keep distance, but their radars paint U.S. vessels, a reminder that one more miscalculation could drag two superpowers into confrontation. By 0630, the Pacific has become a chessboard of steel and fire. U.S. cruisers and destroyers patrol in combat formation, ready to intercept another barrage. Japanese Aegis ships tighten their shield around key bases. South Korea goes to the highest alert since the 2017 crisis. And in Pyongyang's bunkers, generals weigh their next move. More launches would risk annihilation, but silence risks humiliation. The balance between pride and survival grows thinner by the minute. For the sailors aboard the Barry and the Shiloh, the lesson is seared into memory. The age of threats and tests is over. Shots have been fired. Shots have been returned. The Pacific is no longer a stage for deterrence. It is a battlefield in waiting. Or 7:15 local time. Smoke still lingers on the North Korean coastline, rising from the craters where Tomahawks found their marks. The American ships hold steady in formation, their radars still humming, their crews tight with exhaustion and adrenaline. Everyone knows this is not an end. It is a pause, the shallow breath before the next escalation. In Washington, the Situation Room is a storm of voices. Military leaders argue for continued strikes to ensure no more launches. Diplomats warn that each missile fired risks igniting a war that will consume the region. The president's temper is well known, and his words have already raced across headlines. They fire on our ships, we will strike back harder. Around the world, those words echo like cannon fire. Tokyo is no calmer. The Japanese Prime Minister faces Parliament under the weight of history. For the first time in generations, Japanese citizens hear air raid sirens and shelter drills in real time. The pressure to act decisively is immense. Some lawmakers demand constitutional changes to allow Japan's full military power to be unleashed. Others plead for restraint, fearing that one wrong move could drag Japan into a conflict beyond imagination. On the streets of Tokyo, citizens carry gas masks and backpacks, a haunting image beamed across international screens. Seoul trembles in dread. South Korea lives with artillery barrels pointed at its capital, and now every politician, every general, every family understands that if escalation continues, Seoul will pay the price first. Bunkers are inspected. Emergency broadcasts rehearse instructions for millions. The nation that has lived under threat for decades suddenly feels the danger closer than ever. Beijing moves with cold calculation. Chinese warships shadow the U.S. fleet openly now, their radars probing, their captains broadcasting warnings over open channels. State media frames the crisis as proof of American recklessness. But in quiet backrooms, Chinese envoys press Pyongyang to stop short of total war, not out of charity, but to prevent U.S. justification for a permanent, expanded presence in the Pacific. For China, North Korea is both a shield and a burden. Moscow plays the familiar card of condemnation. Russian news channels call the U.S. strikes imperialist aggression and warn that NATO's support for Japan drags the world toward global war. Yet beneath the rhetoric, Russian analysts watch the footage with alarm. The American Aegis interceptors worked flawlessly, a reminder that U.S. missile defenses are not fantasy, but real, lethal, and proven in combat. For a nation that prides itself on missile supremacy, the lesson stings. Inside the Pentagon, the after-action reports arrive. 5 incoming missiles, 5 kills, 1 destroyer fired upon, 1 coastal battery destroyed. Tactical success, perfect on paper. Yet the bigger picture looms darker. Every intercepted warhead, Every retaliatory strike erodes the fragile wall between deterrence and war. Success at sea cannot erase the strategic truth. The Pacific balance is shifting toward confrontation. By midday, the world holds its breath. NATO issues a statement of solidarity, but whispers of fracture ripple inside the alliance. Some members demand firm action, others fear being dragged into America's war. Markets plummet, oil spikes, and airliners reroute away from the Korean peninsula. Ordinary people everywhere check their phones and ask the same questions their leaders cannot answer. The Pacific stands on a knife's edge. A U.S. cruiser saved an Allied base from devastation, but at the cost of escalation that could engulf Asia and beyond. North Korea is humiliated yet defiant. China and Russia circle like vultures waiting for the next stumble. Japan steels itself for a new era of militarization. And America, once again, finds itself staring at the abyss of another endless conflict. The missiles were stopped. The fleet stands ready. But the question remains, hanging heavier than the smoke over the sea, is this the end of a single night's crisis, or the beginning of the next great war?